Hello and welcome to Follow the Bookkeeper. I am your host, Morgan Trine. So on the previous episode, we talked about why we don't use QuickBooks Online in working with any of our clients at our bookkeeping firm, even though QuickBooks is the predominant bookkeeping software on the market in the US currently. So today we're going to be talking about what software we use instead with all of our clients, and that software is called Xero, and that's Xero. So we're going to be breaking this conversation down in the same way that we broke down QBO, which is to go through the functionality and ethics of all the reasons of why we like Xero over QuickBooks. But before we get into those functionalities, I want to give a brief history lesson. So originally, bookkeeping was done manually, right? You had paper ledgers, you wrote it all by hand. And then when computers came on the scene, QuickBooks Desktop was one of the very first softwares available in a computer-based application to do your bookkeeping. There were some other computer-based bookkeeping softwares as well, but QuickBooks Desktop was one of those first ones, and again got pretty big market share in that realm. But then Xero was actually the first cloud-based accounting software. It's a New Zealand-based company, and they were the first ones to take that and put it in the cloud, not on the computer, but on the cloud. And so they did that, and then QuickBooks Online came out after that, a little bit in response to Xero. So just in terms of the history, Xero has more time being a cloud-based software. And so there's just been more time to work out the kinks and work out the weird things that come up, and what it means to be a cloud-based accounting software versus a paper ledger system or a computer-based software. And so QuickBooks Online, even though QuickBooks has that longer history, the online portion has a shorter history. And so especially at the beginning, it was full of bugs, and they just haven't had as much time to modernize the online system as Xero has. And so that's one of the reasons that I believe Xero is actually a better software, is just that longevity in addition to its functionality and ethics considerations. So let's start with the functionalities now. So we're going to start with very basics. And one of the things that I love about Xero and its functionality is there is so much white space. And I know, again, that sounds small and silly, but one of my main issues with QuickBooks Online is that there's so little white space, and the space in which to do different functions isn't your whole screen. It's a little shortened third of the screen. And whereas Xero, everything has white space, and there's no inset scrolling sections. There's nothing like that. You get the whole page to be able to take in information. And so it makes it so that it's easier for your eyes to process the information actually when you have that white space. And so just on that, Xero is just a much better user interface experience, because more white space equals more space for your brain to process that information, which means that it's not as cluttered up, right? Less white space means a more cluttered mind in a lot of cases. And I also find that our clients tend to have an easier time navigating in Xero themselves. And I think that comes down in part to the amount of white space that is there. And then one of the other functionalities I like is on a lot of reports in Xero, you can choose to remove some of that white space. So if you need to see like a full report, and with all of that white space, you can't see the full report and one go, you can customize it so that it gets squished together a little bit. And so you can see that big picture, but you have that level of customization that allows you to determine, how much white space your brain needs in that moment to do whatever it is you're doing. So that's one of the basic functionalities that I really like about Xero is the white space. One of the other things that I really love about Xero, the Xero functionality, is the breadcrumbs. So again, this may seem small, but it has a big impact, especially, again, from the perspective of being in a bookkeeping firm where you're doing a lot of interacting with the software. And so the breadcrumbs are those hyperlinks in the upper left corner that allow you to go back. So say that you're in a report in Xero, you're looking at your profit and loss, and you want to click into one of those accounts. So you can click into the account, you can look at the transaction detail within that category, and then use the breadcrumbs or the back button to get back to the report you were looking at. And you can do that even further. So you can, go into that transaction detail, go, okay, I want to look at this transaction more, click into that, and then the breadcrumbs and the back button will take you back. And so you don't get into that looping issue that we talked about with QuickBooks, where you can get into a screen and then the breadcrumbs or the back button just takes you in this circular, you end up looking at the same two screens, never getting back to where you originally started. And so you don't have that issue with Xero like you do with QuickBooks. And that makes it super easy to dive in and out without having to add a bunch of extra steps to get back at what you're originally looking at, right? So say that you are looking at the profit and loss and you want to look at 5 different categories. You do that and you can go in and go out using those breadcrumbs without any extra steps to get back to that profit and loss. And so it makes it, when you're trying to really look at a bunch of information at once, it just makes that process easy. Again, if you have a small business, there's not a lot of activity, you only look at this once a month, may not be as big of an issue. But if you're looking at your reports a lot, or you're in your bookkeeping software a lot, that extra time to get out of the looping issue makes a big difference. And so that's one of the reasons that I really like how Xero works in terms of the breadcrumbs. Another part of this functionality is that almost every single link you click in Xero, you can open it as a new tab, whereas that's not true in QuickBooks. And so again, if you're trying to do any sort of deep dive or cross-reference a bunch of different areas, right? Like say you want to cross-reference a contact record with a report with a invoice, you can open all of those up in a much easier way than if you were in QuickBooks Online. So again, when you're looking at a bunch of information or you're trying to untangle a mess, it just makes it so much easier and it saves you so much time with some of these little functionality features. So one of the next reasons that we really love Xero is the report customization. And every single report in Xero, you can customize and you can change and you can make fit with what you need 95% of the time. So you can filter, there's a ton of filter options for every single report. You can change how things are grouped. You can add in custom formulas into your reports. So in any way that you need to figure out information, the filters and the customizations available are so helpful, right? So remember with QuickBooks, we talked about how you can't do customization. So if you need to get specific information, you have to export to Excel and then do a bunch of manual data manipulation and data entry in Excel. Whereas with Xero, if you want to pull a report that filters by a specific client, or filters by a specific tag, most reports will allow you to do that filtering. So what we find is when clients come to us and say, hey, I need to know X information, we're able to go into Xero, use those reports, use those customizations, and get that information in Xero directly without having that extra step of having to export it and do it manually. So again, it's like it saves time, it makes it easier, and it makes it easier to answer the types of questions that come up when you're like trying to understand your bookkeeping and your reports. And so all of that, any way that you can think of it, you can sort by, filter by bank account, by the category, by invoice number, reference number. All of those are customizable. So it makes it really, really wonderful. In addition to that, all of the reports are available in every single tier of Xero. So, and I haven't counted the number of reports. I think there's like 50, right? So we're not talking about an insignificant number. And so every tier of Xero has the same reports available and has those same customization available. So even if you're a small business on, their lowest tier plan, you can still get customizable information even though you're not paying for the highest plan. And so it allows our clients to grow in this really wonderful way because they're not, they're able to get the information they need and customize information through these various reports on every single stage of business growth. And so that is really helpful. So there's no gatekeeping happening of, I'm a small business, but I need this information to be able to start growing, but I can't get that information because the reports won't allow me. Like that's a scenario that can happen in QuickBooks that can't happen in the same really at all in Xero. The other part of this that's really nice is that you can save custom reports in Xero. So say you add in you're looking at your profit and loss and you need to add in some custom formulas in that profit and loss. You can then save that as a custom report. So when you come back to every month, you have that report. And so you're not having to add in those customizations every single time. Whereas again, if you're on, one of the lower plans in QuickBooks and you have custom information that you need to see every month in your P&L, to get that, you have to export, go into Excel and manually do that. That's not the case in Xero. And then if for some reason one of those filters, customizations, one of those reports doesn't get that information presented to you in the way that you need it to, you can export it as a PDF or as an Excel or a Google Sheet. So then you can do further manual customizations in Excel and Google Sheets depending on what you need. But we find that 95% of the time, we can answer the types of questions our clients ask us by just going into Xero and using their reporting features to get that information. So that report customization is a huge reason that we love Xero over QuickBooks online. And again, if you were just in your business, it's smaller, it's newer, you don't have as much need for answering operational questions through the bookkeeping, this may be a moot point, but because we're in bookkeeping every day, all day for a bunch of different types of clients, answering various types of questions that they have, Xero, hands down, is the better option in terms of reports and how those reports can support the types of questions that are asked. So that is a big functionality feature that we really love in Xero. The next really big functionality feature that we love in Xero is that it has an open API. And so what this means is that it's really easy to integrate apps and services into Xero because you don't have to have as many third-party app connections between a software you're using and your bookkeeping software, right? So QuickBooks doesn't have an open API. And so if you're using a software and you need to get the information that's in that software into QuickBooks, if there isn't an integration already available on that app marketplace, you're out of luck. Whereas with Xero, because they have that open API, it makes it so much easier. And it means that the softwares themselves can develop an integration. So you end up spending less on third-party apps to make different systems talk to one another, right? So say that you're working with a specific inventory software, for example, and that inventory software can create a direct integration with Xero instead of having to wait for Xero to open up that integration ability or have a third party who is going to do that, like in QuickBooks. And so then that cuts down on the number of subscriptions, so you're not having to pay for as many subscriptions. And all of that, like having that open API and having direct integrations is so important for creating a cohesive ecosystem for your bookkeeping. Because if you don't, you end up spending so much more time on manually entering information or managing third-party app connections, and the amount of time that gets wasted on that is ridiculous. So that direct integration and that open API means that there's less administrative time that you have to spend making sure that information is flowing as it should be. The other reason that open API is so helpful and valuable is that we have a number of clients who have their own custom softwares for one reason or another, whether it's very like industry specific or they just like didn't like the options available for a certain business operations. They can integrate their custom software directly with Xero. And this helps, again, cut down on manual data entry, right? Because you're not having to manually take information from one place to another. That's just room for a bunch of human error and a bunch of time that no one really wants to spend. And so for our clients that have those custom softwares, they frequently choose Xero first because it allows for that integration. And so it allows for a better operational experience all around, again, because you're not having that manual step and the information isn't being siloed. It's creating that cohesive ecosystem that's really important for businesses, especially as businesses grow. And we also frequently have clients who are on Xero and then decide to create some sort of integration. Specifically like within the tech space, they are creating a software and they'll a lot of times create the software only so that it works with Xero because of that open API. And they'll come to us and say, hey, we are creating this new software, or we're creating this new service offering, and we use the API to like connect these systems. And by bringing us into the conversation beforehand, it is so lovely because we're able to provide feedback as part of that testing process to say, hey, you need to have X, Y, and Z import in this way so that how we're managing Xero gets all of the information that's necessary in this way, so it can be things like, you need to change where the customer name shows up in the coding so that the way it shows up in Xero, we can actually see the customer name. That's a really basic example. But having that open API means that the collaboration between the bookkeeping and the operations and whatever new software piece is being brought into the mix can be done very intentionally, so that what is being brought in and what that final flow of information looks like means that you're lowering the amount of manual data entry required, which lowers the amount of human error possible, which means also that you're spending less time on trying to manage all of these pieces. And so that's just a fun thing that I love supporting clients on is when they use that API, and we can really help make sure that the bookkeeping helps to provide the information that's going to be necessary, both from a tax perspective and from a business decision-making perspective, versus just trying to make things fit after the fact and do an ad hoc system that you have to do when you don't have that open API available. So that one is just such a valuable functionality piece in Xero that we really, really love. So then on to the next sort of function/ethics piece. And I touched on this a little bit previously, but it's the pricing plans. So what's really great about Xero pricing, in my opinion, is that it's very reasonable given the functionality that you get. And that where they divide the three main plans makes a lot of sense, right? So one of the issues that I have with QuickBooks is that a lot of time they're really pushing that upselling. They push their bookkeepers to upsell. A lot of times when you go to support, they'll say, oh, this higher tier, will solve your problems. To get the customization, you have to upsell in QuickBooks. And so what I see with QuickBooks is that the plan that you're on doesn't necessarily match the size and operations of the business. Whereas with Xero, where they divide the functionality in those plans tends to match very well the sort of general trajectory of business growth. And so you can have a client that is a small, newer LLC, for example, on the lowest tier of Xero that gets all of the functionality that they need, all of the functionality as a bookkeeper that I need, the same level of report customization across all of those tiers. And so as our clients increase in complexity, then there's these natural points where they move up in tiers. And so there's never a point at which a client is really on a tier of Xero that makes no sense except for one functionality. And so I really, really appreciate, because there's this symmetry between the pricing in Xero and the business status, for lack of a better word. And so all of that is just a very nice feature, and gets into that ethics piece a little bit too, again, because you're not having to do this mismatch between the basic bookkeeping functionality necessary for a business and the pricing tiers in Xero. So now we are moving on to the ethics portion of this conversation. And so this is a little bit more a compare and contrast to QuickBooks. It's, this conversation is in comparison, not it's relative, not absolute. So the first thing in general that I will say with my experience with Xero is that it's just a lot more transparent. There's a lot more information that comes through. They give a lot more heads up. And like when you contact support, there's a lot more transparency about why you're doing certain things. Whereas that's not true with QuickBooks in the same way. Also with support, like in Xero, you don't get punted between support teams. If you have a very weird, like technical issue, that's the only time you may get switched to a different support team. But for the general business owner working in Xero, the main support line is going to get you that information that you need. I find that because we are in Xero so much and we have so many different types of clients in Xero, we end up finding the weird occurrences and like the weird tech issues that no one else is having. And so the support around that, like if you are another bookkeeping firm listening to this, you may also find that support doesn't help you as quickly or as precisely in your first inquiry, just because if you're a bookkeeping firm, you're seeing a lot of more situations than if you were a business owner. So if you're just a general business owner looking at Xero, the support is going to be definitely what you need. And there's not that like huge wait times. Their turnaround is usually less than 24 hours. And there's not that same mixed information that you get from support in QuickBooks. The other thing that I really love about Xero in terms of sort of the transparency is that they have very clear quarterly updates. And so you know that there's going to be new features and feature improvements every single quarter, and they go through that in a demo, they talk through it, and all of those feature updates come directly from client feedback. And so there's this very clear line between the changes and improvements that happen in Xero and the feedback that they get from their accounting partners and their small business users. And so that roadmap is just a lot clearer than QuickBooks, and the cadence of those changes are a lot more predictable in Xero. There also isn't that same impetus to upsell in Xero, again, with going back to those payment plans or the payment tiers, whereas in QuickBooks, that impetus to try to get upselling isn't the same. And that type of marketing and sales strategy is one that I don't appreciate, I don't resonate with. And so that's why I like the Xero pricing plans a lot better compared to the QuickBooks ones. There's also not the same conflict of interest between being a payment processor, getting those payment fees, and those default settings, like I mentioned in QuickBooks. Xero has just started managing some Stripe integrations, but they are not the ones who are setting those settings or doing any of those deceptive fee defaults the same way that QuickBooks does for their merchant services division. Xero is also really great to their accounting partners. There's lots of support from Xero reps for their accounting partners. I speak with my Xero rep very regularly, and there's not a lot of turnover in Xero reps, whereas with QuickBooks, we've had a million different QuickBooks reps, multiple changes throughout the years, and they like never make an effort to reach out and don't provide the same level of support for their accounting partners as Xero does for their accounting partners. And then a big one, a big ethics consideration is that Xero doesn't have a lawsuit against it around defrauding low-income earners. That's a pretty big ethics thing in my estimation. They do have a lot of information on their website also about ESG initiatives, sustainability initiatives. I will say a disclaimer, like I have not done a deep dive investigation into how that's actually playing out on the ground. That is like not my area of expertise, but at least the information is there and that is what they are representing. And there has not been any information that I am aware of to the contrary, that those sorts of values are not being upheld. So that is another part of this ethics consideration that I like about Xero more than QuickBooks. And then finally, the like feeling that I am left with QuickBooks is one where corporate profits is what matter over and above customer experience and customer satisfaction. Whereas with Xero, that is not the feeling that I am left with as a user. You know, yes, they are a company, they want to make money, and like that is clear, but the client experience is still very central to how they set up their business, how they set up their business values, and how they interact with both the accounting partners and small businesses. So just like that, you know, what's that quote? People remember how you made them feel, not what you said. I'm misquoting that, but that is the feeling that I am left with Xero compared to QuickBooks. So for all of these reasons, this is why we use Xero as the only bookkeeping software in our firm, and why anybody who works with us has to use Xero as well. So, right, again, we talked about the functionality, and the high level of customization, the robust features for the fee that you pay, you know, the questionable ethics isn't there, and just like the overall experience for Xero is better in our estimation. I will say that every single team member that has come into Honestly Bookkeeping, most of them didn't have experience with Xero before. They had only used QuickBooks Online. And after a little bit of time working in Xero, every single one has come to me and been like, Morgan, Xero is so much better. I like it so much more. So, you know, that's just a little validation there that I see that the people actually like in these bookkeeping softwares frequently tend to like Xero a lot better. So if after listening to this, you're like, I don't like QuickBooks, or I've been QuickBooks agnostic and I'm interested in Xero, Honestly Bookkeeping, my firm, does provide a conversion service to help switch you from QuickBooks Online to Xero. So if you are interested in that, you can click the link in the comments below to find out more information about that. Also, if you are already on Xero and you either are doing your bookkeeping yourself, or you have a bookkeeping firm that's doing a little bit more of a manual process and not like this same, what I was talking about, especially with the integrations, we have a resource that will teach you, tell you, walk you through all of the different types of softwares that you need based on your business operations, and then what specific softwares within those integrate with Xero already to help make a cohesive ecosystem with Xero and all of the other softwares that involve money, that have information that need to flow into Xero. And so the link for that will also be down below. So that is the summary of why we like Xero, why we use Xero in our firm over QuickBooks Online. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If there's any additional information that you want on top of what I said about why we like Xero, again, leave a comment and we'll get back to you. Until next time, this was Follow the Bookkeeper.